tougher FCAT and higher benchmarks could hurt your school grade and your evaluation. An effort to pull the trigger on a bill that targets public schools and aims for private takeovers, and redistricting goes to court. These are some of the headlines topping Week 8 of the FEA Frontline Video Report. Hello, I'm Joanne McCall, Vice President of the Florida Education Association. Teachers should start preparing for the possibility of lower school grades following changes that will make it tougher for students and schools to get an A. The State Board of Education has moved to amend the school grading formula. It's a revision that could negatively impact your school grade and your evaluation. It was an impressive showing at the Florida Department of Education. Parents, teachers, superintendents, and other school administrators created an overflow crowd at the State Board of Education meeting. Many gathered to express their concerns, both for and against the controversial changes intended to improve the state's school accountability system. Those changes include adding growth and proficiency scores for students with disabilities and English language learners in the same performance standards that have been used for other students in the school grade calculation. Previously, those scores were not included. Despite comments about schools and teachers not doing enough to help students excel, many expressed grave concerns over how these changes will impact students, teachers, and schools.
And I am scared to death that whether we are creating an accountability system that moves educators to teaching our kids at a higher level, or are we creating an accountability system that ensures that we always have a group of schools that are failing.
The board directed the DOE to create a task force of education stakeholders, including teachers and parents, to review the impact on ESOL and students with disabilities. It also dropped the so-called F trigger. It would have led to an automatic F for schools with fewer than 25% of grade level readers. Board members claim that changes are needed to satisfy federal requirements that allowed Florida to receive the No Child Left Behind Act waiver. Two amendments that voters passed to ensure Florida's voting districts are drawn fairly are being put to the test. The state Supreme Court began hearing oral arguments this week over the legislature's proposed redistricting maps. Several lawsuits have been filed challenging the new congressional maps. The League of Women Voters and other nonpartisan groups are said to be preparing additional suits. Critics say the new lines continue the political advantage that Republican leaders got away with during the last redistricting process. Redistricting is a once-in-a-decade process that every state must go through. It determines the population shifts reflected in the last census. Due to growth, Florida will gain 2 seats. The Florida Supreme Court has until March 10th, the day following the last day of session, to rule on the maps. Then the federal government gets to weigh in. This means redistricting may not be resolved for months. A measure that has pitted parents against parents and students against students in other states has hit a legislative snag here at home. But will Florida lawmakers ignore the rules to keep the so-called parent empowerment bill moving forward? It only took 20 minutes for a key Senate committee to jam through the hotly contested parent trigger proposal, also known as the Parent Empowerment Bill. During the brief hearing, lawmakers reviewed a complicated strike-all amendment, questions by members, and endured a whopping 5 minutes of public comment. Many parents and groups opposed to the measure were cut short by Committee Chair Senator David Simmons. The panel was rushing against the clock after insisting on a time-certain vote. It's a ploy that legislators often use to ensure a vote even if debate and testimony is incomplete. The unamended bill barely squeaked by. Senators Nancy Dietert and Evelyn Lynn raised multiple objections because members should have voted on the strike-all amendment.
There is an objection by Senator Lynn. It is now 1:30.
And the rules were not followed, Mr. Chairman.
And I will go ahead and I will submit this to the Rules Chair to determine whether or not it has been done appropriately so that we can consider this. And if it has not been done appropriately because of an oversight, then I will ask for another meeting.
An official protest was filed after the meeting was adjourned, but the objection was dismissed. The proposal allows parents with students in underperforming schools to petition one of several turnaround options, including reopening the school as a charter school run by a private group but financed with taxpayer dollars. A similar measure that passed in California has run into serious problems with parent groups and students fighting over whether to turn over struggling schools to private charter companies. Cash-strapped school districts will be able to rely on their buses to pick up more than their students. Representatives in the Florida House have passed a law that allows school bus advertising to glean more money for schools. The added funds will help districts pay for school bus services. The bill now heads to the Senate floor. Concerns over whether lawmakers would be able to wrap up their work on time have been resolved. The House and Senate have come to agreement, and the Budget Conference Committees began meeting on Wednesday. With an endgame in mind, legislative leaders are rushing to make the March 9th deadline to end the 2012 session. They have to come up with a final version of the budget 72 hours prior to a final floor vote. Lawmakers are hashing out the differences between the House and Senate versions of the state budget in conference committees as we speak. They began the process over $1 billion apart in the pre-K through 12 education budget, with big cuts to higher education. Negotiations will continue until all differences are resolved. Then the cooling off period will begin before the final vote. You've probably heard that K through 12 education will receive $1 billion over last year, but that barely puts schools at level funding from previous years. It means teachers and other school employees will have to continue doing more with fewer dollars. The extra $1 billion replaces lost property taxes, the EduJobs funding that saved 20,000 jobs last year, and it will hopefully cover next year's projected student growth. If you're expecting a raise, forget about it. So don't be fooled. This $1 billion is not really $1 billion that will make the difference for our teachers and ESPs. Lawmakers have not added enough money to cover your raise or help offset your increasing health care premiums. There has been a lot of talk among legislative leaders this session about Florida students receiving the best educational opportunities possible. Yet this education budget says little about the state's true commitment to public schools and the students who attend our schools. As we near the end of the session, it becomes imperative to stay on top of the issues that are important to our students and our schools. We continue to urge you to check out feaweb.org for the latest information on the legislative session and sign up for FEA's Take Action alerts. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook for real-time alerts. But before we leave, please take a careful look at the FEA bill watch list. These are important proposals that we must continue to monitor up to the end of session. Make sure to stay up to date with the FEA Frontline Video Report, and we'll see you again next week.